Welcome to the Under Construction Podcast with me, Martin Williams. Here we talk about how to build or rebuild your life one step at a time. Let's get to work. And thank you for tuning in to the Under Construction Podcast. My name is Martin Williams. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. You may do so on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and SoundCloud. All the links to the podcast can be found at guidedexpressions.com/podcast with the S on the end. Today, I wanted to talk to you about producing more than you consume. So, we live in an age where we have so many conveniences, so many things that are at our fingertips. We have virtually any channel you could possibly think of. We have the internet, we have social media, we have movies, untold amount of TV shows and games and all these other things. And in and of themselves, these are not bad things, right? But we have endless amounts of things to consume. And the problem with that is that sometimes people get out of balance when it comes to what they produce versus what they consume. The economic health of a country, any country, is usually determined by the difference between what they take in versus what they put out. A country that exports more goods than it imports is known as an economically healthy country, right? And this is independent of anything else that's going on in the country. We're just talking economics. And it's the same way with our lives, right? If you import more than you export, then that is known as a trade deficit, right? And then, so you have trade surplus, and I kind of left that out the first example. You have a trade surplus, and then you have a trade deficit, right? A trade deficit is usually a sign that the economy is not as strong as it could be. So when we talk about our individual lives, what is the balance between what you produce versus what you consume? Okay? Because if you produce very little but consume a lot, then you're probably not as productive as you could be, right? And productivity is more or less a benchmark of success. You know, the more productive you are, the more, money that you're probably going to make, the more influence you're probably going to have, right? The better you get at whatever it is that you decide to do. If you only do something one time, you're probably not going to be as good as someone who's done it 1,000 times, right? Okay, because that person has been more productive in their field and whatever they've decided to do. So it's important that we don't consume as much as we produce. And theoretically, we definitely want to produce more, right, than what we consume. Okay? I'll give you a great example. We're in a time of political elections, right? So we have elections coming up, actually in a couple of days. Election day is coming up, and I got to tell you, I've never been so happy to see an election day come in all my life, and it really has nothing to do with my preference of who I want to win. Is more so just that people can, kind of stop talking so much about it. And, it's interesting, and it's obviously very important for a lot of reasons, especially here in the United States. But, it's just, you have all these commercials and you have this propaganda, and it definitely becomes something of overload, right? It's just constant stuff concerning these elections, right? And so with all of that messaging comes a lot of material and a lot of content that's being basically pumped out endlessly, right? Back in the old days, you just had newspapers and you had books, okay? So the news cycle basically ran once a day. Whenever the newspaper came out, that's when the news cycle ran. Then you had television, stations who would produce the news at certain times throughout the day. For some of you younger folks, the news only came on in the morning, sometimes in the midday, the mid-evening, like 6 o'clock, and then 11 o'clock, right? So that was all the news that you got, right? If there's anything that you missed, there may be some breaking news, but that's only like for the big stuff, right? And then, we had the internet come around, and, so now we get news, and, CNN came in between there. And so you have 24-hour news channels. So the news cycle went from being, maybe 2 or 3 times a day, once a day to 2 to 3 times a day. Now it's 24 hours. And now it's basically by the second, right? With social media and the internet and everything else. So there's just so much to consume is my point. And if all you do is consume, okay, that produces a deficit in your life, and it produces a deficit mentally, right? Because you're not even consuming things that are causing you to grow. You're consuming things that are basically deteriorating your mental, your mental capacity, your mental clarity, right? Because, it's just overload. It's all the time, right? It's highly emotionalized. So you're feeding on that. And so in a past podcast, actually the last one, I talked about, feeding on things that aren't healthy, right? And, kind of leans into this as well. But more so than anything else, you want to, if it's something that you really care about, you're better off producing something. You're better off writing a blog that is either for the current president or against or neutral, wherever you stand. You're better off producing something that will cause people to, basically think a little bit more about what they're going to vote for or who they're going to vote for. Understanding now a lot of people have already voted. But my point is, you're better off producing more than consuming, is my point, right? If you are someone who consumes a lot of social media, you watch a lot of videos, you watch a lot of memes, and, some of that stuff is okay, right? Some of the stuff, it's fine, it's harmless. We could all use a good laugh, right? But I'm talking about consuming hours upon hours of social media and not really putting anything out into that space. Okay, you're creating a deficit, right? And that, when you produce a deficit in one area, it tends to bleed over into other areas, right? People who overconsume on television tend to be unhealthy. They tend to not have healthy relationships. They tend not to be as successful in their career as they could be. They tend to just not be happy as they could be, right? They tend to have weak spiritual lives. I mean, these things tend to bleed over into different areas in our lives, and we don't really think about it while we're doing it. So why am I talking about this? Why am I going through this? It's to remind you that when, you're about to watch that 10th Facebook video or that 11th Instagram video, to put the phone down and go produce something, produce a blog, produce a podcast, better yet, produce something in the real world as far as, maybe help someone out, maybe, pray for somebody, maybe, give a ride to someone who needs it, or, maybe just read a book. There's so many things that you can do. And, reading a book is consumption, but you're producing knowledge, right? That's a little bit different. Even though you're consuming a book, you're producing knowledge that you can use down the line, okay? So that's a little bit different. It's just understanding that you want to produce more and you want to consume less in everything. And when you begin to start thinking that way and start living that way habitually, you're going to improve your life more and more in more than one area. Just a 10 to 20% decrease in social media consumption or television consumption pays huge dividends down the line. So really just think about that this week. Think about how much you're consuming online. I know my phone gives me a rundown of how much time I've spent looking at the screen on average every week. And, there's days and there's weeks where it goes down and then it starts creeping back up. I work from home, so it can be very easy to kind of look down at the phone. But what I've started doing is basically, putting a playlist together and then, just kind of keeping my phone out of arm's reach, right? So I got the music going, but I'm not looking at my phone 24/7. It really helps me to be more present. It helps me to be more engaged with my family. It also helps me more in my work. Just to think a lot clearer. I think you think clearer when you're not, basically reciting every single thing that you see on social media. So it's just achieving that balance. And I challenge you to do that this week. So thank you so much for listening and tuning in. My name is Martin Williams. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share the podcast. And I will talk to you next time. Don't forget to subscribe to the Under Construction podcast on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and SoundCloud. For more information on Guided Expressions courses and products, go to guidedexpressions.com/products.